Okay. All right. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining in our second Elul Va'ad. So just to be clear, a Va'ad literally means a meeting. And what we're doing here is getting together and meeting on areas of self-introspection and on growth. As we started talking about last week in our introductory shir in the series, we are trying to really set the groundwork for Rosh HaShana and for Yom Kippur, and the work of Mussar is really the work that is required for us to bring us into that space. We talked for a little bit about Mishlei, the idea of stories, of parables last time, and I pointed out that the book of Mishlei in Tanakh is really the book of Mussar, and we'll talk more about that today and why that's relevant. This will kind of serve as a segue, kind of complete the introduction to the concept of Mussar, and also really take us into the avoda, practical, in my opinion, practical avoda for the month of Elul, and how we can really plug in Mussar into our own lives. And I'll just say one more thing by way of introduction, is that last time we talked about this severity of Mussar, that there comes a point in the year, and that's Elul, where as it's brought down, I think it's brought down in the name of the Maharil, that Mishenichnas Elul Marbin B'Tshuva. This month is when Elul comes in, it's a time for increase in tshuva, and a lot of that is really fueled by a concept called yira, which carries connotations of awe, reverence, fear, trepidation. There's something serious about Mussar. There's something that we spoke about last time, which is the fundamental difference between a human being and an animal, which is that we can articulate ourselves and we can articulate our minds, our consciousness. We can think about who we are versus what we want to become. And that's really the difference between a human being that's endowed with consciousness, that has free choice, which is the root of tshuva that we'll talk about more today, and an animal. And we saw that stressed by none other than Shlomo HaMelech himself in Mishlei, where he points out that a person who loves Mussar, who loves tochacha, loves das, loves life, and a person who hates rebuke is a wild boar of the marsh. That was Shlomo HaMelech's language, not mine, and that was something very intense. I want to kind of flip to the other side of the story about tshuva today, the story of Elul. Today's Va'ad is called Looking for the Love in Tshuva. And there's Marmakoma's sheet, so there's a pile over here. This is not a text-based endeavor. That's not what we're doing. But I always like to provide the sources in front of people so that you can see what I'm kind of basing it on. And if I ever do want to draw everyone's attention to a particular text, we already have it right in front of us, and that eases things up. First of all, l'chaim, zocha, for everybody here to come into Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur. We'll say this fighter again at the end, but from the beginning, just in case, everyone should be zocha to chaim aruchim shleimim, a year where we are nechtam for chaim and for rachamim and for all of the incredible bounty and shefa that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can pour on us on our lives. We should be zocha all this year, Rosh HaShana Yom Kippur. L'chaim, l'chaim. Okay, so I want to start with the classic story about Elul, which is the very famous acronym of Elul. The word Elul is an acronym, Aleph Lamed Vav Lamed, for the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, Ani Lidodi Vidodi Li. And as the commentaries point out, the Mishnah Berurah brings this down in his opening comments at the beginning of the laws of Rosh HaShana, that these letters, Ani Lidodi Vidodi Li, the first letters spell out Elul, and he adds on, the Mishnah Berurah points out that if you take a look at the last letter of each of those words, Ani, Ledodi, Vidodi, Li, each of them end with the letter Yud, which numerically has the value of 10. 10 times 4 being 40. This represents the 40 days of Elul through the Aseret Simei Tshuva. So from the beginning of Elul until Yom Kippur is a time of Ani, Ledodi, Vidodi, Li. Right? So it's a time of I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Where does this pasuk come from? This is from Shir HaShirim, also a composition of Shlomo HaMelech, one of the three great contributions of Shlomo HaMelech to Tanakh, aside for his other minor speeches in the Book of Kings and Divrei Yamim and so forth. This is one of the major works of Shlomo HaMelech, and we're going to talk a little bit about Shir HaShirim versus Mishlei in a moment. Shlomo HaMelech is describing in the book of Shir HaShirim the love that exists between God and the Jewish people. The entire thing is a love poem, a testimony of love between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people. And throughout the poem, there's this give and take, there's this tug between Klal Yisrael and Hashem, chasing after each other, looking for the love. Where did it go? Where did it disappear to? And trying to recapture that love. And so if Chazal are telling us, if Shlomo Melech is saying, Anila Dodi v'Dodi Li, this is the essence of Elul, it tells us that this is a season of renewing that love, of I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me. We have a sense of partnership, of union, of rekindling a relationship that might have gone dry, that might have lost its passion over the extension of time. And this is the time that this is about. Another acronym for Elul, which is brought down in the commentaries, is towards the end of Devarim. Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to the close of his Tochacha. The entire book of Devarim is a book of rebuke, admonishment, of giving the Jewish people his harsh love. At the end of the book, he talks about Umal Hashem Elokecha et levavcha ve'et levav zarecha, that God will circumcise, open up, remove the covering, the toughness, the exterior of your hearts and the hearts of your children. La'ahavat Hashem Elokecha, to finally love the Almighty, b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha l'man chayecha. And the commentaries bring down, the Baal Turim says here on the pasuk, that et levavcha ve'et levav, aleph lamed vav lamed, these four words, et levavcha ve'et levav, your hearts and the hearts of your children, is also an acronym for Elul, aleph lamed vav lamed, which is again another indication of the work of Elul, peeling away the barriers that exist between us and the Almighty, which is what the orla represents. The circumcision is removing of a blockage which limits the amount of connection, of contact between the male and the female. This is the connection, metaphorically speaking, in the month of Elul. This is the time of reconnecting, of getting that intimacy back again, being vulnerable with our spouse, namely in this case, the Almighty. And this is the vibe around Elul. Now, that's a very different vibe that we talked about last week. Right? In our previous session, we talked about the yira, the fear, and the seriousness of Mussar, and that it requires kind of a harsh and very realistic self-assessment, and realizing that I'm not close to what I could be, but I can still try to achieve more. This is much more focusing on the positive side of that. That, yeah, I mean, I haven't been living up to the relationship maybe, but the relationship is strong and vibrant and passionate and real, and that's what I need to focus on during this month. So if this is the story, right, this is the party line that shows up in the texts, the question for me is, I guess, sort of, where do we go wrong in our understanding of Elul? Why are we not feeling that in the air? The birds are chirping, the love is being kindled. That's not really the vibe that we get around Elul. Where are we going wrong? And how does this fit with the other side of the coin that we spoke about last week, as far as the severity and seriousness of Mussar? So I want to take a look again at Mishlei, this book that we discussed and analyzed last time. Shlomo Melech wrote this incredible book called Mishlei, which literally means parables or metaphors, stories. And the question is, like, where does this fit in Shlomo Melech's life? So the truth is, there's a lot of discussion about this. We're not going to go deeply down this road. There's a lot of discussion in the Medrash about the three books that Shlomo Melech wrote: Shir HaShirim, Mishlei, and Kohelet. Song of Songs, right? Beautiful poetry of the love between God and the Jewish people. Mishlei, these parables, Mussar, and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, whatever that means, which is a story about Shlomo Melech exploring the world's pleasures and finding them all futile and meaningless and empty, and ultimately coming to his conclusions at the end of the book. So he wrote these three books. Now the rabbis want to know in the Medrash, which did he write first? What's the order of these books? Like, when they were released to the Jewish people for public reading, how did they receive them, right? And the Medrash records a debate between different opinions, but the final opinion here, on the first page in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, is from Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yonasan says that he wrote them in the following order: Shir HaShirim, Mishlei, and then finally at the end of his life, Kohelet. And he explains that the reason why he knows this is because each of these books reflects another stage of Shlomo HaMelech's life. Each one of these books expresses another stage, not only of Shlomo's life, but universally of the human condition. And so Rabbi Yonasan explains, he says, Ma'asila Rabbi Yonasan miderech eretz. Rabbi Yonasan learned this out from the way of the world. When a person is young, kasha adam na'ar, omer divrei zemer. When a person's young, they say songs. The world's beautiful, love songs. You write poems to your beloved, and everything is flowers and butterflies. You get a little bit older, and you know, life kind of settles down, and you get serious, and you start thinking about, like, I need wisdom to guide my life. These emotions are not necessarily enough. I need to ground them in the intellect. And it says he got a little bit older. Higdil omer divrei mashalos. He got older, and he started saying parables and stories, and we'll address why that's the next step. Hizkin, he got older and he became, this old, cranky, depressed guy. And Omer Divrei Havalim, he started saying, life is useless. What are you wasting your time on? Kindle, they don't know what they're doing. This was a Shlomo HaMelech at the end of his life, saying, Hevel Havalim, Amar Kohelet, Hevel Havalim, Akol Havel. Everything is vanity, everything's futility. So there's a storyline here of Shlomo HaMelech's life, and it tells us something about Mishlei. It's right there in the middle of his life. It's at his peak of production. And the Medrash closes and says, everyone agrees that Koheles was written last. There are other opinions, maybe the Mishlei was written before Shir HaShirim, but everybody agrees Kohelet was the final book of his life. Okay, so Kohelet must be like the peak moment, right? Take a look at the end of Koheles. Again, we're not learning Koheles right now, but the closing of Koheles, Shlomo's last words that he puts on paper, the end of his life, he's old, he's frail, he has the last words that he wants to contribute to the Jewish people. He says an amazing thing. There's a paragraph right at the end of the book, after he finishes teaching his lessons about futility. He says an amazing set of psukim. This is Koheles chapter 12, verse 9. Yoter shaya Kohelet chacham, more than the fact that Kohelet was such a smart guy, od limad da'at ta'am. He also taught wisdom, knowledge, da'at, connection. Exactly what Mussar was, to give us da'at. Ve'izen v'chiker v'tikein mishalim harbe. Not only that, you know what he did? He thought about it, and he analyzed, and he established many, many mashals. Many mishalim. Wait, Shlomo, wasn't that like 20 years ago, and you were like middle-aged? Now what are you talking about mashals again? Yeah, and they're really good. He says, listen, I wanted to figure things out and explain words, but I got to explain to you, it's not worth writing books. Don't waste your time with all of this chachma and nonsense. Sof davar, he says, hakol nishma. At the end of the day, everything's been heard before. Every book's been written. Et Elokim yirav et mitzvotav shmar ki zeh kol adam. Bottom line, you want to know what to do, focus on Yirat Shamayim. Yirat Shamayim, that's Mishlei. That's the point of the book of Mishlei. So at the end of Kohelet, he's saying, yeah, this book was great and all, but go back to my masterpiece. Go back to Mishlei. That's where it's all at. More than the wisdom that I taught you right here, I also taught you Mashalim, Mishlei, parables. And that's where the real action is at. Ki zeh kol ha'adam. Because this is all of the human being. This is all of humanity. This is what it's about. Et Elokim yirav et mitzvotav shemar. Have Yirat Shamayim and safeguard the mitzvot. So what is this prevalence of Mussar? And I did this analysis just because I thought it would be fascinating. Like, how often is Mussar showing up in the book of Mishlei compared with the rest of Tanakh? The numbers are not normal. I showed the chart on it because it's hard to believe. So I did a search in Tanakh for the word Mussar and in every one of its different forms. And throughout all of Tanakh, it shows up 50 times. 30 of them are in the book of Mishlei. Right? The next in line is Yirmiyahu with 8 mentions of the word Mussar. So the vast, vast majority of Mussar shows up in this book, in all of Tanakh. Right? In the 5 books of the Torah, the word Mussar only shows up 1 time in the book of Devarim, which is, again, it's about Tochacha. God has nothing to say about it. Moses has nothing to say about it. Comes Shlomo Melech, comes Mishlei, of all places, parables and stories, and that's where Mussar becomes involved. What does this have to do with stories? What does Mussar have to do with stories? And how does this all connect back to Elul? So the question is really why is Mussar so... Bruce, Chaim. The question is, why is Mussar so profoundly connected to parables? So there's an incredible story, a little acute anecdote that's attributed to the Dubna Maggid. The Maggid of Dubna, one of the great early Hasidic storytellers. He tells the following story. I'll read it because it's just the way it's passed down in the tradition is so beautiful. The story goes as follows. Truth, a character, Truth, naked and cold, had been turned away from every door in the village. Her nakedness frightened the people. When Parable found her, she was huddled in a corner, shivering and hungry. Taking pity on her, Parable gathered her up and took her home. There she dressed Truth in story, warmed her by the fire, and sent her out again. Clothed in story, Truth knocked again at the villagers' doors and was readily welcomed into the people's houses. They invited her to eat at their table and warm herself by their fire. This is a beautiful illustration of the difference between stark truth, reality, and story. The truth hurts. The truth is, as he says, naked and frightening. It's bare. and it doesn't have the comfortable clothing. They make it palatable and acceptable and easy for people to digest. We've learned no lesson more clearly in the past couple of months and years than this, right? V'amevin Yavin, the reality of the truth is not something that people want to accept. Give it to them in a story. Show them a nice, some footage of some suffering children. And all of a sudden, people's wallets open up and their hearts open up. And parable has the power to drive home a story, right? I can tell you, Torah is for your pleasure. Chazaku Baruch, everyone goes home. If I tell you a story about how someone was on the brink of complete collapse in their self, they had reached the midlife crisis, and they discovered the Torah and the truths and the reality and everything, and wow, it blew them. The story has the power to drive the truth into our hearts, into our homes, to be warmed by our fire, to be invited to sit at the table and join our dinner together. Stories have the power to make the abstractions of reality into our story, a part of our lives. And that is really the difference really between history and story, right? It's not my chiddush, but the word history is really a connection of his story. It's somebody else's story. The moment that Jewish history departs from the concept of history is in our understanding that Jewish history is actually our story, not somebody else's. It's my story. It's our story. It's not somebody else. It's not detached from us living off there in space as some theoretical. It's part of my identity, right? I trace my lineage back to these people. And so this is traditionally, what this story of the Dibna Magid is really the essence of all parables that all the rabbis use. I quoted a couple of sources over here. The Ramchal points this out in places. The Midrashim point this out. Yosef Kimchi points this out, that the concept of mashal is really to clothe truth, to clothe a deep reality in terminology that the people understand. The Ramchal uses this to explain all the agadatas, all of the far-fangled stories in the Talmud, right? Rabbis who were out at sea and met these sea urchins or went up on this massive wave and they spoke with the sun and the moon and all these sort of fantastical stories. Says the Ramchal, all the rabbis were doing were utilizing common stories and metaphors of the time and couching truths in those narratives, in those storylines. And you kind of piggybacking on the storylines that everyone's already familiar with and using them to contain truths. This is the essence of how the Torah uses mashalim. And so this is why Rabbi Yosef Kimchi says an amazing thing. Rabbi Kimchi is one of the great Rishonim from the 1100s. He explains at the opening to the book of Mishlei, he says, Chachma below Mussar, ke'oel below meitarim. He says, wisdom without Mussar is like a tent without spikes to hold it up, without the poles that hold it together. The Chachma is the scaffolding. The Chachma is the building that you'll live in. But Mussar is how you erect it. Mussar is how you create a structure from all of that wisdom. It's the thing that upholds all of that wisdom and creates a world around you that you can inhabit when you live in that space. And so this is what Shlomo Melech did by writing the book of Mishlei. He did something brilliant. Rather than sit there and talk like Koheles does later on in his life, where he says, physical pleasure is a waste of time. I tried it. I'm telling you, don't bother drinking. It doesn't get you anywhere. Don't bother with the vanities of the world. It's a waste of time. Instead of that, in Mishlei, he tells you stories. He tells a story about a drunkard. He tells a story about the breakdowns in their relationships and how they end up alone and disconnected and filled with anger and small thinking. He tells a story about a woman of valor. Who can find such a woman? Eshes Chayil. He tells stories. And by utilizing the art of story, he drives home realities. He drives home truths. And this is why at the end of Koheles, he says, listen, this is all I've got at this point in my life. I can't sit here clothing things up. I'm past that point. I've reached the point of cynicism. But go back there. If you want to really take Chachma, you want more than Chachma, Ladas Chachma Mussar, says Mishlei. I'll take you the next level in the book of Mishlei. This was the peak contribution of Shlomo Melech's life, giving us the art of storytelling. Because in that ability that he had, that he was able to harness, he was able to drive home the truths in a way that the truths themselves couldn't really hammer home. This is a lesson that Moshe Rabbeinu learns throughout the Torah also, right? He says, at the beginning of Dvarim, he says, God didn't even give you guys the capacity. You were too immature to hear the truths that I had to tell you until this point, until 40 years later. It took you time to mature. And so in the book of Dvarim, instead, he starts to tell them stories. and the entire opening 6 chapters of the book of Dvarim, instead of railing them with mitzvot like he does the rest of the Torah, he tells them a story. He says, remember, there was once this young nation deeply in love with the Almighty. He took them out on the wings of eagles. It was incredible. You stood at Sinai. You remember, guys, the fire, the sound light show. It was incredible. You guys remember, right? It wasn't your fathers. It was you. All of you alive here today. It was you. He brings it into a story. This is the power of a story. And this is the question that I think we need to ask in the month of Elul. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about Anila Dodi V'Dodili. What are the stories that we tell ourselves about our lives, about Teshuva, about the month of Elul? And how do those stories change the tent that we're living in? They allow us all the other mitzvot that we're doing, all the other wisdom that we've acquired, the data that we have about Judaism, about the truth of Torah. How does the avoda, the Mussar of Elul, allow us to erect that tent, create that space for ourselves, that we can live within that, inhabit that space? And of course, that space, that tent of Mussar, becomes literally the shocheni tam b'toch tumatam on Yom Kippur. When Hashem says, I'm willing to dwell with you amidst your impurity, as Hashem says, that's the return of the Shekhinah to the Olam Moed. That's the return of Moshe to the camp. I'm speaking in broad strokes right now because I want to get to the driving home, the actionable points. That was the return of the Shekhinah to the Jewish people, and that's ultimately Sukkot, where we build that temporary place. We build that tent, we build that space, and we allow the Shekhinah, the divine presence, the clouds of glory, to completely encompass us, because we've allowed the basic structure of Mussar to allow that entire structure to exist. So very quickly, what is our story? What is the story that we tell ourselves? Right, if we want to be on the same wavelength as Elul, we want to be tapping into Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur, what's our story? So our story of the Torah is very clear. If we read the book, if we bother to actually pay attention to how Hashem paints the story is quite explicit. It's a story of love between God and the Jewish people. It's a story of God hoping, of God dreaming, of God loving. Olam chesed yibaneh. God created a world fueled on love, fueled on loving kindness. The foundation of the universe is God's desire to give. Chok hatov lehitiv, the rabbis say, the Ramchal says. It's the nature of the perfect goodness, the Almighty, the ultimate good, to bestow goodness. That's our story. That's what we're doing here. We're here to absorb the ultimate good that we possibly could, the greatest pleasure that we could possibly imagine. And what's that greatest good? Say the rabbis, the Almighty himself, the source of all perfection, the source of creation. The source of all good is the Almighty himself. Our goal, the ultimate pleasure, is to have a deep and intimate connection with the Almighty. That's where we're headed. That's where we want to be at. That's our story. What's our story of Elul? What are we supposed to be doing during this month? So there's another famous pasuk that's quoted around this time of the year. And we read it in the Nevuahs. We're reading during this time of the year. Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet says, Dirshu Hashem b'himatzo. Seek out God while he's around, while he's available, he's able to be found. What is this time? This is the time, say the rabbis, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. When is God available? He's always available, right? Doesn't it, the pasuk says, V'chol kareinu elav, anytime we call out to God, he's available. What do you mean, call out to God, seek out God when he's available? This is the special time of Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. That's when Hashem is available. Kira'uhu biyoso karov. Call out to him. Invoke his name. Try to create communication in as much as he's close during this time of the year. That's our story about Elul. Anila dodiva dodili. Like, drive that into our hearts during this time of the year. I am for my beloved. What am I for? My beloved. We ask ourselves that question. What am I living for? What do I want to accomplish? What am I striving? My beloved. Elul, my beloved. I'm here for love. That's what I'm trying to connect to. That's what I'm participating in right now. So traditionally, the words of Dirshu Hashem b'himatzo, seek out God while he is to be found, while he's available. As I mentioned, people translate it to reference to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But there's an amazing, I was reading the writings of Reb Shlomo Wolbe in the Alei Shor, and he quotes an incredible Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, ancient Aramaic translation of the Navi, of Yeshayahu. He translates these words, Dirshu Hashem b'himatzo, in the most fantastic way. He doesn't say seek out God while he's available. The way that he translates it is Tiva'u dechalta da Hashem ad da'atun chayin. Search out the fear of God. Search out Yiras Hashem while you're still alive. Bo'u min kadamoi, ask of Hashem. Look for Hashem, ad atun kayamin, while you're still here. So Rav Wolbe asks, I don't understand. The pasuk says, seek out God while He is found. Seek out God while He's available. Why is the Targum translating it as saying, seek out God while you're still alive? And Rav Wolbe says the most incredible thing. He says, you know why? He says, where's God found? When you're alive. That is what it means when God's available. What it means for God to be available, if I have to think, if I'm reading the words of Yeshayahu and I think, when's God available? Your life. That's where God's available. Your existence, your chaim, your vitality. The fact that you're breathing, the fact that you're alive, that you're conscious, that you have existence today, that we woke up and we said, wow, modeh ani lefanecha. That's where Hashem's available. Look into your own life. As Eov said, "B'sari echaz eloka," from my own flesh, from my own existence, I perceive the Almighty. This is the avoda of this period of the year. And he goes on to explain that the normative explanation is also true. It's also a reference to Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur, because it's this period of the year that we're called upon to get in touch with our true existence, get in touch with the fact that we are alive. And we're not just alive in the way that we have a pulse, we're alive in the fact that we have an neshama burning inside of, kol zman neshama b'kirbi. We have this incredible energy burning in our midst. That's real. That's bihimatzo. That's what it means that Hashem is available. Seek out Hashem while He's alive. Yeah, it's you, dum-dum. Get in touch with your own existence and find God in that reality. Now, sometimes you're going to have to tell yourself a story to get there. You're going to have to drive home that story. But make sure that you're the one doing it. Don't turn to other people for their narratives about what your life is about. Look inward. Discover it within yourself. This is what we say. This is the incredible nevuah from Hosea. Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha. Shabbos Shuva. The Shabbos couched between Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur. We'll talk about this more, Mirz Hashem, when we get there. This is the nevuah that Hosea tells the Jewish people, that we read every year. At the climax Shabbos, the peak of Kedusha, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha. Return. Yisrael, come home. All the way to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Say the Chassidish Sfarim, they bring down, how far can Klal Yisrael be shav? Ad Hashem Elokecha. All the way until Hashem Elokecha. You don't have to go halfway. The power of tshuva is that you can go all the way ad kisei hakavod, all the way to the highest heights. You could be right there. Continues Hosea and says, Kichu imachem dvarim. You want to be shav? You want to come home? You know what you got to take in your pocket with you? Kichu imachem dvarim. Take words with you. That's something you should keep in your pocket on your journey, on your tshuva journey. Take dvarim. Say the Sfarim, take the book of Dvarim, the book of Tochacha. Take Dvarim into your life. V'shuvu ad Hashem, and then you'll return to Hashem. That's all it takes. A little Dvarim, a couple words. Tell yourself a story. Imru elav, tell to such a person. Kol tisa avon v'kach tov, tell to these people. Speak it out. Anyone who has avonot, anyone who has a verot that they're worried about, kach tov, take good for yourself. That's the Torah. V'chayisa v'ravisa. You should have the Torah. You should keep the Torah so you should live and thrive and be great and be alive. L'man tichyu me'avas Hashem otanu, because of Hashem's profound love for us and in keeping the covenant with Avram, with Yitzchak and Yaakov. That's the story that we need to tell ourselves. Anila dodi v'dodi li. That's the momentum for turning into Mussar. That's the momentum for deepening our yira. And this is exactly, I'm just realizing this right now, that the question is asked on the Rambam. The Rambam presents the mitzvot of ahava and yira as following on the steps of one another. The Rambam says that we have a mitzvah to love God and a mitzvah to revere God, to have awe of God. And he says, what's the step of love of God? When you contemplate God's creation and you look around the world and you see the incredible creation that He made and the limitless wisdom and the beauty, and it's just, it's unbelievable. Ma rabu ma'asecha Hashem, and you just fall into this deep, captivating love. And then the Rambam says, but then when you start diving deeper into that, and you analyze, and you pull it apart, and you look at the details, and you realize that that incredible beauty that you were just struck by, you could spend an entire lifetime just studying a caterpillar. You wouldn't even scratch the surface. And that whole beauty that you saw, the sunset, and the quadrillions of different little details of the universe that all coalesce into one incredible, majestic harmony that you fell in love with in a moment, you could spend a lifetime unpacking that chachma. The chachma is what creates the yira. But the first step is the ava. The first step is falling in love with the Almighty again. Anila dodi v'dodi li. And that's how we regenerate that yira. And the Rambam says that when you start diving into the yira, when you start looking at the details and becoming blown away by the chachma that exists under every fingernail, under every leaf, under every proton and neutron and quark that makes up the universe, and you start realizing how much is going on under the surface, that pushes you into a state of yira. The Rambam says you're immediately thrown backwards, and you recognize your own minimal stature in contrast with the tamim deot, with the all-knowing Creator. And so this is the two sides of Mussar. Mussar is fueled in the month of Elul by Anila dodi v'dodi. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And what am I working on? Says the Baal Turim, Umal Hashem Elokecha es levavcha ves levav zarecha. Rip open the heart. Expose our vulnerabilities to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kechui machem dvarim. How do we do this? Tell ourselves the story of who we are. Reiterate it to ourselves every day. You know what's a beautiful tefillah of this? Maybe as a great tikkun for this? The incredible tefillah that was established in the Middle Ages in the time of the pogroms and the terrible attacks against the Jews. The tefillah we say in the morning called La'olam Yeh Adam Yirei Shamayim B'Seiter U'V'Galoi. It's a prayer that shows up right after the morning bracha. It's before Baruch Shamar. Everybody skips it. It's exactly this point. It's a bracha of Kiddush Hashem, and it's this idea where we tell our story in extremely succinct fashion. We say a person should always be Yirei Shamayim, should always have reverence for heaven in public and in private. Wake up every morning and say the story of our people, and say basically our lives are vanity, our lives are futility. There's pretty much nothing. Motar adam mina behema ayin. There's almost nothing that makes a human better than an animal. Ki hakol havel. Everything is havel. Everything's futility, just like Kohelet said. Aval anachnu. But who are we? Amcha b'nei britecha. We are your nation, the children of your covenant. B'nei Avraham ohavecha. We're the children of Avraham, your beloved, that you swore to. The children of Yitzchak Yechidecha. The children of Yaakov, the one that you chose. Me'avatcha asher ahavta oto. Misimchatcha asher samachta vo. Krata et shmo Yisrael v'yishurin. The love that you had for him. The simcha that you rejoiced in them. You called them Klal Yisrael. Lefichach anachnu. Therefore, we, us here today, are here to stand proud and say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It's the most incredible tefillah. This is what the Jews in the Middle Ages had to say at times where they were forbidden to recite Shema in public. They would couch it into this story. This is the story. Maybe it's an incredible avoda for the month of Elul to really daven this piece of Birchos HaShachar with Kavana. This is what it's about. This is how we take Chachma and make it Mussar. Tell ourselves the story of the love that exists between God and the Jewish people. And by the way, we'll just close by saying that if you actually pay attention to the tefillos that we say on Rosh HaShana, everyone thinks like Rosh HaShana, all day we're like begging Hashem to save our lives. We don't say one word of asking Hashem for mercy for our averos that we've done on Rosh Hashanah. I'm telling you, it literally is completely absent from the Machzor. Pay attention. You'll see. It's not there. It's so far so that the Arizal actually has the custom. We do say Avinu Malkeinu on Rosh Hashanah. The Arizal has the minhag to take out the first line, where we say Avinu Malkeinu Chatanu Lefanecha. God, we have sinned before you. We take it out. We don't mention sin at all. What do we talk about? Right? You take a look at all the piyutim. Just one as an example. We say L'rachem Amo B'Yom Din. What is this day of judgment about? For God to be compassionate with us, with His nation on this day. L'shomer Ohavav B'Din. To protect His beloved in judgment. L'tomech Tmimav B'Yom Din, to support those who walk with a full heart on the day of judgment. That's what Rosh Hashanah is about. That's what Elul is preparing us for. That's what we're trying to get in the zone for. Yeah, of course, the other side of the coin of that is realizing, blown back by our own futility and our own significance, and the realization that I have to work on myself. And if I don't work on myself, then yes, Mosar Adamina Behema Ayin, there's really not much differentiating myself from an animal. It takes my dibur, it takes my k'hui machem dvarim to drive home that truth into the power of parable, to clothe it in parable, and to bring it into my home and to warm it by the fire of the Hashivosa Elavavecha. And I saw brought down from the Balatanya that this pasuk that I quoted, Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem Elokecha, the Balatanya apparently says that this power of tshuva during this time of the year is ad Hashem Elokecha. Comes to the point that you can make Yud Kei Vav Kei, the ineffable Almighty, the creator, the source of the universe, the force of being that created everything, can become Elokecha. Ad Hashem Elokecha, until Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, becomes Elokecha, the name that represents God's closeness, His intimacy, His involvement with the world, Hashgacha Pratis. That's the power of tshuva. You can go from being distant from the Kadosh Baruch Hu, from thinking about Hashem as this all-powerful force of existence out there in the universe that doesn't have to do with me, to being Elokecha, making Him yours, my God, your Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's the power of tshuva. And this is exactly the power of Elul. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu says, and we'll close with this. This is the power of tshuva in our own lives, and this is the power of tshuva la'asad lavo. The end of days, the book of Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Almighty tells us, it's a prophecy, it will become true, it's happening in our days. There will be a final tshuva of the entire nation of Israel. V'shavta et Hashem Elokecha. We will all return to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'achris hayam, sof Yisrael lasos tshuva, b'sof galutam, says the Rambam. The end of Klal Yisrael, the culmination of Klal Yisrael, is to do tshuva at the end of their galus. And it's going to be only from that darkness. It's only going to come from the place, that dark place that we're in. The Hefetz Hashem Eschem Ba'amim. We're going to be spread around the nations. V'nishartem b'misei mispar. And we're left few in number. And how did we get there? V'noshantem ba'aretz. You became asleep, say the rabbi, says the Medrash, in the land of Israel. That's why I threw you out. Because you didn't hear the call of the shofar. Uru yisheni mishinaschem. Wake up, those who are asleep. Wake up from your slumber. That's Rosh Hashanah. That's Elul. That's Anila Dodi V'Dodi Li. Wake up to the truth. Take that truth home in tshuva by telling ourselves the story of Mishlei. This is the power of telling those stories. And as Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Ubikashtem misham es Hashem Elokecha umatzata." You'll search for a Kadosh Baruch Hu there, in that darkness, in that disparity, scattered around the corner of the world, barely being able to find a few people to come together to search for truth, to try to elevate our lives to the next level, to not settle for second best, to really create a place of Torah, of Kedusha, where we're striving in every way, shape, and form of our lives to live true to the Torah's directive. It's going to come from there. You're going to search for it in the darkness, and you'll find it there. Yumatzasa. When will you find it there? When you start searching with all your heart and with all your soul. This is the power of Elul. Anila dodi v'dodi li. The work of Elul is v'ashivos elavecha. Bring the Mussar, bring the Chachma of Torah, bring the realities of MS, of calling out to Kadosh Baruch Hu be'emes into our lives through the stories that we tell ourselves. What are the stories that we tell ourselves, about who we are, about how much potential we still have left in our lives, what we can still accomplish, what are the things that we're just like stuck with in our lives, and what are the things that really we have incredible amount of room for growth in? What are the stories we tell ourselves about the Almighty, about what He thinks about us? Because what He tells us about Himself in the Torah is crystal clear. He loves us every single day. He loves us unwaveringly. And He's waiting. All He's waiting for is for Klal Yisrael, mi tein v'haya levavam zelachem. If only Klal Yisrael could have those hearts ready to seek out a Kadosh Baruch Hu with all our might. This is Dirshu Hashem Behimatzo. Search for Hashem in as much as He's here during this time of the year, because He's here in our lives. This is the time where we feel our own vitality more than ever before, and we strip down the barriers that we've placed all year long, or our entire lives for that matter, between ourselves and those truths, and tell ourselves whatever stories we need to. Stop turning to the external, to the media, to our communities, to our societies, to whoever you're relying on to get your story about life from. Your narrative about what the world's about, what direction the world's going, how Klal Yisrael is doing, what it means to be a normal person, how I make a productive schedule. Leave everybody else's stories to them. Sei gesund, they should be gebenched, enjoy their stories. What's your story? What's your mashal? right? This is what Shlomo Melech was telling us. Don't look at the futilities of Olam Hazeh. Don't sing the pleasures. Don't sing the songs that I did when I was in youth. Tell yourself the right story. Because if you tell yourself that story, you'll invite that knowledge. You'll invite that chachma into your home. You'll turn chachma into Mussar. And in doing so, you'll awaken that spark within yourself. You'll awaken that love. You'll welcome that story into your hearts. And ultimately, we'll be zocha to that place that Moshe Rabbeinu told us about. That bikashtem yisham, if we can truly dive deep into our hearts, pull out the story that is really beating in the heart of every yid, which is that we are children of the Almighty. Kadosh Baruch Hu loves us endlessly. All He wants is for us to be close. All He wants is for us to just forget about our past. Chui machem dvarim v'shuvu al Hashem. Just pick up the right storyline. Pick up the right story. Pick up the right words. V'shuvu ad Hashem and come close to Kadosh Baruch Hu. We should be zocheh this Elul, this Rosh HaShana, this Yom Kippur, to come into a place where we tell ourselves the right story. We tell ourselves the story that a Kadosh Baruch Hu wants. Melech chafetz b'chaim. That's what we say. That's what we add into our tefillos during the Yom Narayim. The king who desires life. That's what we want. That's what he wants. Let's just get on the same wavelength. Let's get on the same page. That's what the Torah is all about. V'chayisa v'ravisa v'chay behem l'man tichyu l'man tichya. It's like one of the most repeated stanzas in the Torah. Get in touch with the fact that all the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants is our greatest lives possible. And that is true and is found within the Torah. And Be'ezus Hashem, if we can create that space, if we can work on telling ourselves the right story, those pillars of Mussar will be erected within our lives, and we'll create that place where Bezrat Hashem on Yom Kippur, the Shechina will be able to truly be Shocheni Tam B'toch Masam, to come into our midst, which be Zocha, as I mentioned in the beginning, to be signed, sealed, and delivered for a year and indeed a life of health, of wealth, parnasa, of bracha, of shefa, of revach, expansiveness, openness, dreaming big and achieving the greatest things that we could possibly imagine through the fuel, through the energy and fire that we discover within ourselves during this month of Elul. So, Chaim, again, shkayach everyone for joining, and we should be zocha to Chaim this year. Chaim. Thanks so much, everybody.